Okay, I'd like to call the meeting to order Thursday, June 28th at 10 o'clock. Board of Assessment Review.
So we'll just do a roll call. My name is Kurt LaBelle. I'm the assessor's agent for the town of Raymond. And Kayla is the board secretary.
I'm Brenda Tubbs.
Mike D'Arcangelo.
Joanne Stinson.
Chris Hansen.
I'm Robert Hyman, Meadow Road.
So we have some new business on the agenda. We're going to do the election and appointment of board officers and delegates.
So you can open it up to discussion if you want. And we could just talk over.
Okay, I'll open it up now to general discussion.
So I believe, Brenda, you were the chair.
I was.
What's your interest in?
If somebody else wants to do it,
Yeah.
that's fine. Let them have an
Are
opportunity.
we all, excluding Brenda, are we all new?
Yeah. Right? Were you on? Yeah, you're new to this
No,
board.
yes.
Yeah.
And I have a question as an alternate,
Yep.
how my role is to,
My belief is that we have Bob Harmon and Mike and Brenda as the primaries. If one of them is unable to sit for a hearing, whether through scheduling conflict or a conflict of interest scenario, we would ask an alternate to step in so that we have a quorum and can have a majority decision.
So there's just 3 board members that makes up the quorum.
I believe so, yeah.
Always has been, yeah.
so for example, in motioning for a chairman, do we participate in all these things?
Oh, I already
would
have a
think so.
question that I do not know the answer to.
I don't think we would.
It's an unusual situation. Most of the boards that I've dealt with for Board of Review have a
Yeah.
full, they don't have the alternate
alternates,
situation. Let's,
The other part of that question is the chair and vice chair should be one of those 3
Right.
permanent members.
right, yeah, and secretary.
And secretary,
Yeah.
so.
Chris, you have probably the most experience with Board of Appeals, and this board runs similar to an appeal board. It's a quasi judicial board. Do the Board of Appeals have alternates?
Not usually.
Darn.
We do now for the first
Yeah,
time,
yeah.
yeah. 'Cause
We've
we're
had,
full.
well,
Yeah.
most boards, it's a hard time getting a
Yeah,
full
right,
board, let alone
right.
have an alternate.
Yeah,
Yeah.
But we've got, you and I are both alternates,
yeah.
so.
Let's
So I would
see.
assume we sit in silence and listen, so we're prepared to step in if needed.
Right.
Would be my understanding.
Me too.
Okay.
So let's see here. We have 5 or 3, no more than 5 years. Questions of officers.
So we probably wouldn't even attend a meeting unless we were asked.
Municipals may provide home if there are 2 or 3 associate members. Chairman may designate which will serve in the place of an absent member. Yeah, you may. I don't know that you would be required to attend the hearing if all
Okay.
3 of the other folks. We know.
Well, we would get
everyone's-
notice that somebody was gonna be
Right.
absent, then we'd show.
Right. So I guess the question would be, Mike or Bob, are either one of you interested in serving as the chairman of the board? And the chair would primarily run the meeting.
Actually, I was going to clarify that with a motion by
Yep.
making a motion that Brenda is our chairperson.
Is there a second? Go on, get your head.
I am.
Oh, so you would, so then you would have a vote.
Okay.
All in favor?
All in favor?
Okay. So you got that? So Brenda survives.
As chair.
So just point of clarification, at the actual board meeting, wouldn't it be good if in the event something came up at the last minute that one of the 3 didn't show up, then maybe the alternatives should come to the meeting just in case?
You could do that.
Does that sound
I've heard
reasonable?
it both ways, right, that you have to be there to listen in case you need to step in at some point on that. I
There
don't know.
certainly would be no harm in it.
Right.
that I could see. Seeing if the,
I'm thinking.
doesn't really, it's not really addressed in the board's.
I'm thinking it would be a shame to schedule a hearing, have everyone here, and not enough board
Yeah, it
members.
would, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think the other position that we're going to need is a board secretary, who would have the overriding responsibility of getting the decision out, and, you know, the hearing, any notices and things like that. Kayla will act on behalf of the secretary, you know, so, but ultimately the secretary has the responsibility. So when it comes time for the board to actually deliberate and then set down its decision, for example, the board could write the secretary would craft the decision with the board, and you can do that in handwritten notes, you know, and the clerk could type it up. It's just that the clerk can't craft the decision for you. You have to craft your own decision.
Now, is that typically done, I think I read in our manual that you can do that at the end of the meeting, or you can, I think within 10 days,
Yep.
you can re-meet
Right.
to do that.
Yep.
Is that typically, to me, that would be a better process instead of trying to do it all in one night?
It really depends on the board and getting if the board is if it's hard to get everybody together. Sometimes
True.
people want to get it all. They're just like, let's just suck it up and get it all done. But you can reconvene for the notice at another time. Yes.
Is everything being recorded at the
Right.
meeting?
Yes.
So we can refer back to that in terms of verbal discussion to formulate a decision?
I think so, although typically the board will hold the public hearing, close the public hearing, and then often will conduct deliberations immediately afterwards. No more input is allowed, but you would have your discussion often right then and there. I think you could take testimony, come back a week later, hold your deliberations, and then do it. It's just, I've never seen that done that way. Usually it gets closed off, the appellant and myself kind of just sit here and watch you guys, and then you have your discussion. You say, oh, I believe this, or I took this into consideration, but we can't offer anything at that point. And then once the decision is voted on, then it comes time to write it down. You know?
So included in the decision is basically a finding of fact
Right.
of how we made the decision and
Right.
what
Yeah.
conditions determined that decision.
Right, yeah. You'll find in this material and in your board standards, which I've put there, when you read that over the course of the next month or so, you'll find that there's statutory benchmarks that the appellant has to meet. You know, they must show X before you can get to Y. You know, if the appellant shows X, that the assessment is crazy wrong, then you get to the next step, which is the appellant then shows what the true value should be, and the board has to arrive at a value of its own and justify the value. But before you get to that point, the assessment has to be overcome first. So that's, you know, there's layers, and that's all gets laid down in the finding of fact. You know, if the board makes a determination that the assessment is wrong, then you have to go to that next step of arriving at what you think the value is. If the board makes a determination that the assessment is not manifestly wrong, you lay out why that is, but then you don't have to go to step B. You know, you stage it. But yeah, that's the primary thing that the appellate court, if it goes to a superior court, they look at that type of stuff. they don't they look at, was the decision made in a way, and is it all documented? They don't necessarily ask, like if the Board of Assessment Review says, oh, the value should be 400,000, the Superior Court doesn't say, oh, I think it should have been 425. They look to see if how you came to 400 meets the test of legal standard. It's a little different. You folks will have what's called a de novo hearing, where you're basically the point where all the information comes in, and you make a fresh look at the assessment, whereas the court only reviews the information that came into the Board of Assessment Review. They don't conduct a assessment hearing of their own. It's a
And they're more focused on procedural
right.
process rather than a factual analysis.
They want they will need to see that the analysis is laid out properly in law. If you're not applying legal standard in your analysis, they want to know that you've applied the proper legal standards in the analysis and haven't made up something that's not either statute or case law and applied it to the decision making. It's just, that's what they want to see.
And that's the next level of review after a board like this
Right.
is Superior Court.
Yep. Any interest in secretary? Board secretary is only going to come down to you two guys.
I'd be willing to give
Okay.
it a shot.
So,
So
thank
if
you.
one of you could make a motion.
I'll move that Mike becomes the secretary of this board.
I second.
And then just a vote,
And we'll
and
vote.
we know it's,
Oh, yeah, you can, sorry.
Okay.
all right. So I think that, I don't know if,
Do we need to appoint a board clerk?
you certainly could, if you want to make a motion to appoint Kayla as your board clerk.
Okay.
It's not I don't believe it's an official position, but it's you're delegating those responsibilities.
Okay.
You wanna-
I'll also move that Kayla becomes our board clerk.
Second. Take a vote. Okay. Next on the agenda is the discussion of review of the board procedures.
So these board procedures that you have in front of you are as far as I know, the most current Board of Assessment Review procedures. They were adopted in 2006. The initial Part A deals with how the hearing is typically laid out, the order in which the board will hear the case, the assessor, and then the appellant, and then any cross-examination, and then after it's done, the deliberation process and the vote process, and any decision whether to defer or not if they need more information at a later date, and the responsibilities of the secretary for the material maintenance, the crafting of the decision, the findings of fact, and Kayla will assist you in that process of getting all the records, together and such. The main thing I think that the board needs to concern itself with pre-hearing is Part B, which is the board standards. With this being a quasi-judicial board, you want to try to avoid ex parte communications, discussing the case amongst yourselves outside of the board setting. You want to try to avoid conducting, your own analysis of the case outside of the board. Everything, what you see, everyone should see. So you don't want to. You want to try to refrain from doing a drive-by inspection of the property. If the board should decide it needed to go to this property, then everyone would go as a board. It's just pretty much common sense type things. and this is to avoid one person having knowledge that everyone else doesn't have, so that everyone has got the same material. It's the responsibility of myself on behalf of the town assessors and the applicant to provide to you the material that we want you to see when you make your decision. So at some point prior to the hearing, typically a couple weeks prior to the hearing, you'll get a submission from me outlining the town's case, the town's defense of its value. And you may get something from the appellant. I'm not sure if I'm not sure if it's outlined in these board standards or not. Oftentimes, the boards will establish a deadline pre-hearing for submission of written materials, so that when the hearing takes place, it's essentially an oral review of the submission, and you don't get a lot of surprises that come in at the last minute. Obviously, it's hard for one party to respond to evidence submitted from another party if they're only just seeing it. So I'm not sure if that's really in here or not, but when I send out my material to you folks, I'll also send it to the appellant so they can see what I'm saying before we get here, and hopefully they do the same, so that I'll have a chance to investigate their evidence.
So in other words, when you send your information to them, you request they send their information to you.
Right, yeah, I'll just, even if it's not addressed, I'll say, look, this is my submission, here's a copy for you, please send along whatever it is that you want. Sometimes appellants will just, they won't have a lot. They may have a ton, or they just want to just have their day to outline their case. So
And unlike a true court case, they're not precluded from bringing additional stuff in at the hearing, correct? I mean,
Well-
they could bring more stuff that we hadn't seen yet.
they could, but the board would have to decide how much weight to give that if it hasn't been analyzed.
So we could choose to not put 100% value on it?
Yep.
Gotcha.
Yep. I think as long as it's made clear to the applicant that the board expects to have the material a little bit early so they can see it, and, so that the appellant has a level of expectation.
And that's something you would,
When I provide mine, I'll also, or I've been in contact with the appellant. I'll be speaking with them in person in the next week or two. I'll have a discussion with them about submission of materials.
But the board could set a hard deadline?
Could, yeah, and I'm not sure if it's in here, but it's fairly common that the board sometimes will put in its procedures that material should be submitted X amount a date prior to the hearing. And
I thought it said somewhere in here, maybe
it
it's
might,
one of the
I didn't.
examples.
Oh,
where it
yeah.
said something about if
Yep.
it's extensive material,
Yep.
lengthy, that
Yep.
you must provide it 14 days prior to.
Right.
Yeah.
The seminar I went to in May with Jensen Baird, the attorneys there deal with a lot of these types of issues, and they said that's a common thing amongst the boards that are pretty active, that they want to get the material in as much as possible in advance, so that you don't have a lot of surprise. What you don't want to have is something comes in and then the assessor has to say, oh, can we table this so we can get back to you? Or the assessor brings something in that the appellant is unaware of, and the appellant says, oh, I need time to look at this, and then it drags out. You kind of want to, I mean, it is reasonable. Some things are going to come in, last minute, just because somebody might say something that they just realized that wasn't in there. But it's up to the board to weigh that evidence accordingly. If the board wants, it could amend these procedures to reflect that. Or they can leave it and just and make it known that that's an expectation, I guess. Or you can just take it all right at the hearing too, you know, I've seen it, county commissioners tend to just, you show up and everything gets, you know, and they, so it, yeah, you know, I think it's up to the board how you want to handle it.
I just think pre-review on our part is paramount to having an effective meeting.
Yeah.
And whether we harden up the rules to require that, or have a soft way of just making that as a request, both from the assessor and the applicant.
Yeah.
I don't care how we handle that, but we really need to have it ahead of time. Well, what have we, Brendan, remember what we've done in the past? I know we haven't had many, but most of that stuff came in early, or, you know.
Most of it was available ahead of time, yeah. I don't think we did any last
Or
minute.
you didn't do any advance? Well,
I
Not
think
any
it's,
last minute.
I think probably in general, I'm just guessing, we're probably gonna get most of the stuff we need, or all. I think it's also important to consider the worst-case scenario, though, where all of a sudden we're hit with really sort of what appears to be important information that we haven't had a chance to review. So I don't know that we want to spend the time amending our procedural rules to require that, or not.
well, let me ask a question of the assessor, that they have to file with the selectmen
Mm-hmm.
a reason why they're looking for an abatement. The selectmen then have made a decision.
Right.
So all that information probably will be the same that the applicant would submit to us.
Often it is, although it doesn't have to be. In these types of residential cases, it very likely will be. And
It'll be the same?
very likely will be the same. Often with larger commercial type taxpayers,
Right.
because they know the board hearing is a de novo hearing, sometimes the Board of Assessors will get nothing, and they'll save it all and come in loaded, for bear for the BAR hearing. So that's just a tactical, I guess, decision. But usually with residential,
Right.
and you'll find this is a residential case.
Right.
Usually it's going to be right along the same vein. They may do some additional analysis to tighten up their points, but you're probably going to, and we will, some of the material I have for you today is related to the material that the selectmen received.
Okay.
It's not the full suite of it, but I will provide everything with my submission. I wanted to give enough today so that we could look at the jurisdictional issues, the timelines and things like that. But the actual nuts and bolts of the case, pretty much everything that came into us
Right.
will be pushing to you. So, I don't anticipate a problem there.
Okay. So, I mean, the information, like as you say, on residential is already part of a public record that we could get
From
in
the
advance.
initial appeal. Yep.
Right. So additional information comes in at our meeting, we can consider that,
Right.
where that is. So,
Yeah.
Okay, I'm fine with that. if
Yeah, I
everybody
think I
else
am
is.
too, since it's residential.
It's
So I think you guys have any I know I've just given these to you now, so it's hard to look them over, but is everybody relatively, I guess the most important thing, if there's a month or month and a half lag between now and the hearing, is to, not save your questions, write them for the hearing, wait for the submissions, try not to do a lot of your own back investigations, rely on the parties to provide that, and try not to talk to each other much at all about the case.
Right.
Yeah.
We can talk about procedures.
Yeah.
Board
yeah,
procedures,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
not
We
the
don't
case itself.
want to have case talk. Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
Will there be an automatic site review, or is that up to the board based upon the information they receive?
The board will have to, the board can make a decision if they wish to schedule that. They'd likely have to table the hearing and schedule a site inspection. It's totally up to the board.
But it could be requested prior to the hearing,
It could be, but you'd have to get together to,
right?
You'd have to-
request it,
yeah,
okay.
yeah. It doesn't very often. I will say that I've never been to one that had a site visit included. Usually things become, because of the legal standards, I could see that if you got to the point where you felt that the assessment was impeached and you had to then arrive at a value of your own, because doesn't mean you necessarily accept the applicant's value. You have to arrive at a value of your own. Then you could say, we really need to go and see this property. You can make that decision as you go. Whether
So at this time, are we all set with the procedures? Next on the agenda is the judicial review.
Okay, so I have a packet of material for each of you there. Some of this is notices that we've gone back and forth, so you can see the timing of when the appeal was filed. There is the appeal itself, and the selectmen's guidance memo is in here. We refrain from discussing the contents of it. We only want to look at jurisdictional timeline things for the purposes of today.
Thank you.
Oh, I'm not even.
Robert?
Yeah, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
So I did do the first one, I
can
did do a checklist.
Can I interrupt
on
for a
this.
second? Just
Yep.
before we get into this,
Yes.
can we just kind of talk about in terms of when you go out to assess a property,
Yep.
how you go about it? I mean, there's three methods, and I'm not sure if you work off the cost, the market, probably not the income approach on residential property, so.
Right.
Could you just try to explain that to me? I mean, do you do like homes that are within an area, what they're valued at on a comparison basis?
I will get into that more in the hearing, but I'll give you just a broad brush. It's a little bit different than what we call single property appraisal, where they tend to do direct comparisons to 3 sale properties. We do some of that, but it's mostly when you're doing mass appraisal, which is the valuation of several thousand properties at one time. You have a mass appraisal model which is established, and it tends to run on a combination of cost and market approach. Oftentimes the building component is a cost approach, replacement cost minus market depreciation based on condition, and coupled with a more market approach of the land, and you bring those two together. And the key with mass appraisal is trying to keep like property alike, and you try to when you do the cost approach, how much it costs to build a house has a lot to do with the quality of the components that go into it. So you attempt to maintain continuity so that very good houses are all being done as very good, and all the average houses are being valued as average quality houses. In terms of location, we have a methodology in place which accounts for all the various water bodies in town, the location desirability, view, all of that type of stuff. And in my submission, I'll have an overview of that. So that's typically the method. And then what happens is annually, as sales happen, those sales are matched to the assessment value, and they're scored as to how close the assessments are to the sale and how tightly banded the ratio is. So a town might be right close to market, they might be under market. In some cases, over the last few years, towns have been over market. All of those things are relatively okay because the values are only used to disperse the tax load. But what you're looking looking for is the band difference. You don't want a segment of the population valued at 50% of market value and another segment valued at 90% of market. You want equity. So that's what we look for when the sales come in, to see if the model is producing a result which meets the legal standard. Once the market begins to change and things begin to change and the sales come in and the model isn't working right anymore, that's usually what triggers a revaluation, and the model becomes recrafted with current day market conditions, costs, location, things like that. So
we generally work off the mass model, and then we adjust for specific circumstances.
right.
Is that what you're saying?
Today,
Nutshell?
the law, what the law expects is what they call a reasonable value. It doesn't anticipate that every assessment is going to be accurate within a certain 1%. The general rule is a 10% of, you want to try to be within 10% of your average ratio. So if your average assessment is 90% of market value, if your assessment market model is working well, if you get 100 sales in, they're going to range anywhere from 80 to 100. They're going to fall in that 20% band. That's considered to be excellent. If you're outside of the band by 20, one way or the other, on average, that's when you become to fall out of compliance. So sometimes you'll hit them really close. Sometimes you'll be over. Some you'll be under. What the law is looking for are what they call manifest problems, where you get a certain segment, a certain type of property that sells over and over and over again, and the assessment is 150% and everybody else is at 100%. It indicates there's a problem with the model in that area that needs to be adjusted. Is that answering your?
Yeah, it does. Okay, thank you very much. Great.
So this is a jurisdictional checklist that I did for the board. The applicant's name is Thomas York. His property is at 29 Kings Grant. And along with this, there are some submissions that came from Mr. York as well as letters from the town. And I primarily provided those now as so that you could see the timing of these. Because before the board hears this case, they have to decide whether or not they have jurisdiction over the case or not. So, if an appeal came in past the initial deadline, obviously, if that's a statutory deadline, that the board would not have jurisdiction to hear the case. So this checklist is, I'll go through it. The first one is, did the taxpayer file a written application for a tax abatement? The law requires that the initial application be in writing to the assessors. I do have a copy of the initial application here, and it was in writing. It's a written submission. It isn't just the guy, somebody came in and said, hey, I want to, can you look at my value, so to speak. It's a written application. So the answer to that is yes, that hurdle has been successfully met. Was the initial abatement application filed with the proper person and within the relevant deadline? So every year when the town commits its taxes, it sets off a new deadline to challenge those taxes. And the deadline for each year is 185 days after the commitment. So the date of commitment can it changes a little bit every year. It tends to be semi-consistent. It's usually mid-September for Raymond. So in this case, it was a mid-September tax commitment, which means that all written applications had to be filed by March 17th of 2018. This application came in back in November, so it's certainly a timely application with the local board. So there's no issues there as far as the initial application with the assessors. And the next question is, did the assessors wait so long to answer the request one way or the other that it was deemed denied? So what that means is when an application for tax abatement comes in, the statute allows the Board of Assessors 60 days to render a decision one way or the other. They can't just let this thing float along. If 60 days goes by and there's been no answer, the law says the application has been denied. It's considered a denial, and the applicant can either live with it or they can then start that next process. And the only caveat to that is that if the assessors need more than 60 days, they can request an extension and the applicant can agree to the extension in writing. And that's what happened here. The board requested an extension to the applicant, and the applicant granted the extension until March 31st, and the board rendered its decision on March 12th. So it was outside the 60 days, but an extension was granted, and the board issued its decision within that extension. In the smaller towns, extensions are pretty common. You have a board of selectmen that only meets once a month, and then you have an assessor's agent who might only come in a couple of times a month. It takes, often 2 months can go by pretty fast, so oftentimes an extension will be asked for and granted to preserve the tax appeal, and they can keep their appeal rights, so they know it's going to get heard, and it gives the town time to properly investigate the case. So that's where we are on that. Now we have, did the taxpayer file a written application with the local Board of Assessment Review within 60 days of the decision? So within 60 days of the March 12th decision, or the receipt of that decision, which might have been a few days later, did the applicant file appeal with the local board? So they have a 60-day window to decide to come to you folks. What I have received from the applicant is a letter of intent that says, let this letter serve as our notice to appeal the Board of Selectmen's decision. And that was a timely letter. I have asked the applicant a couple of times through email to actually fill out the board's application and submit it, but I haven't received it yet. But I think that with looking at it from a due process perspective, this suffices as a, the intent is clear. The applicant intends to appeal the assessor's decision. So right now, in terms of material to come into the board from the applicant, this is really all that's been submitted to the board. No material supporting the case, just a letter of intent at this point.
Well, just a
we'll
question
see.
on that.
Yep.
The board application, which has not been filed, what would be different in that compared to that letter of intent?
The board application is going to ask for some logic as to support the request. It's going to ask what the applicant feels the value should be. Sometimes the applicants, they don't deal with these types of issues a lot. They've kind of already stated what they thought their value was. It's very similar to this in terms of information. It just goes to the Board of Review.
So what the applicant might do is in filing the abatement application to us, is just really copy what he sent to the selectmen.
He could, or he could
Could add more information.
He could change his you know, he
Some
could
other
change
stuff.
his opinion of value
Right.
when he comes to you. Doesn't have to be the same. But that's what they're
Why would he
looking
file
for.
the application?
Where?
No, why? I mean, you asked him twice.
Right.
Why wouldn't
I
taxpayer?
don't know. Well, you might be able to, I did include in this packet the email chain. And if you were to read through this, you might be able to come up with your own reasoning why some things haven't been done yet. I'll kind of leave it up to you as you read through.
Is there a requirement, either state law or town regs of some sort, that a specific application has to be filed, or is it more about something in writing has
I
to be
believe
received?
that the statute would require written application, and my opinion is that if a court were to review this, while they tend to be very tightly favored in terms of the assessment on value issues, you know, the assessment is presumed to be valid. When it comes to due process and giving people their rights to actually file their challenges, I think the court would tend to be lenient on the side of the taxpayer and say, look, you know, the intent here was that, you know, whether or not they provide good information to the board, that all comes into play when it comes time to make your decision. But I think, you know, they've made their statement that they want to have another say here. So I would accept that.
Yeah, I mean, for what it's worth, I think you're absolutely right. I think if we denied based on
Yeah.
only this received
Right.
and it went to Superior Court, I think we'd lose.
Yeah, I don't think they would care for that.
Right.
It would happen. It just could bounce right back down to you.
Right.
Yeah. So did the proper person file the appeal? Yeah, Mr. York is the deeded owner of the property. Did the taxpayer submit a true and perfect list to the assessor where a request was made by the assessor in writing? This 706, MSR 36706 is the assessor has some powers of discovery when making an assessment, and one of them is a requirement to ask taxpayers to provide a true list of their property that is subject to taxation. That list is generally asked for prior to making an assessment, and it's generally sent out to all property types. And we don't typically send those lists because they're expensive. You know, this is back 50 years ago when you didn't have modern technology, town might mail out a request to every taxpayer in town that says, "Tell me what you got," and that's what they would use. And if the taxpayer didn't send anything back, it would bar their ability to appeal their value later on. Towns now, usually you see 706 requests such as that sent out in a couple of scenarios. Prior to a revaluation, oftentimes they're sent out as a matter of course. Just what you get back is, yeah, I have a house and 3 acres of land. It doesn't help you a lot, but it engages the applicant, and it puts them, it can prevent them from appealing later. And then with personal property, business equipment, we do send out annual requests because we want to know, have you added computers and copiers? What have you done? And then sometimes specific properties will be targeted. I have like pipelines. Sometimes you'll certain types of property that make changes, whether adding gas infrastructure in a town, you might ask annually for them to provide their list. In this case, no pre-assessment blanket list was submitted. But what we do have is the next one, which is, did the taxpayer answer any requests from the assessor for additional detailed information? So if an appeal comes in, the assessor has the right to ask for what the assessor feels might be relevant information. Because sometimes you'll get an application in, but it might not have a complete picture of everything you think you need to value the property. In this case, we did make a request for information when the appeal came in, a 706 request, where we asked for any copies of any appraisals that had been done on the property. We didn't receive one with the application, so we asked if you have any, send them to us. We asked for information on the insurance of the building, primarily because this is a newly constructed house. Wanted to see how the town's cost approach was matching up to insurance cost approach, to see if there were some indication there of a problem. And in the construction contracts, what were the, what's the cost to build this new home? And then the final item was, we were looking to do an inspection of the property. It's pretty, we want, before we value these properties, we do want to do a full inspection of the property. In this case, I had visited this property in the summer of 2016. At that point, it was just a shell. It was evident what was there, and it was valued accordingly. In the summer of 2017, prior to this assessment, we visited the property. There was no one there. The house was complete, but we left a note. What I typically do if I go to a new home or a home that's been remodeled that I feel requires an interior inspection or a full inspection, if the applicant isn't there, I will leave a notice with the applicant in their door. Hey, we were here today. It checks off, call us for an appointment, and I would write in why I want the new appointment. New house appraisal, remodel, so on. I didn't receive a callback on this one in this last summer to appraise the house prior to the assessment, so we used our best judgment in terms of estimating what we thought was there. The applicant, I think, has stated to me that he didn't receive the notice. It is possible that it blew off or who knows what. I mean, sometimes people don't visit these properties on a regular basis, particularly where they live out of state. In terms of our follow-up request on the appeal, we did request an inspection. I outlined that I would be available every Thursday in January and February, except for one Thursday. The applicant responded to me by email that I will say the applicant provided all the other materials that we requested. He provided an appraisal, provided the insurance and the construction information, but indicated to me that we live in Connecticut, so we can't do the inspection anytime soon. This was in the middle of winter. Will the tour you did last summer suffice? And I had indicated to the applicant that I thanked him for providing the material that he did, that we would review them, and that last summer I only got an outside look of the property. But I understand that with you residing out of state, an inspection is difficult this time of year, and the board will get back to you once it makes a decision. So the real jurisdictional issue for the board here is that, we did not successfully conduct an inspection of this property either prior to the assessment or upon appeal to the assessors. I don't feel like the applicant was attempting to avoid that inspection, because they did provide the other material that we asked for. So, the board, we looked at the material that was provided, we moved ahead, and we made a decision regardless of whether or not we had the inspection or not. whether or not that creates the board, you folks have to decide whether or not that's a jurisdictional problem, because the statute does say that if a property owner neglects or refuses to answer these inquiries, they are barred appeal. We sort of accepted the rationale that he couldn't get there. I will say that I've been in contact, I did receive an email from the applicant today, so we do have an appointment. I've indicated to the applicant, you'll see in the email, that I do need to inspect this property going into this next assessment. We do have an appointment set up for July 6th, so it's going to happen. I do not have a problem with holding a hearing in spite of this lack of inspection, but there is a jurisdictional issue here as far as the board. The board would have to decide that there was a suitable reason, I suppose, that the inspection wasn't provided.
In light of the importance of that interior inspection in terms of value, is it possible that we could have the hearing after that inspection?
Yeah, I'm almost certain the hearing's going to come after that, because we'll talk about the hearing dates, but I think it's definitely not going to be in the next couple weeks.
Okay. I mean, to me, again, it's a sort of procedural thing that you don't want to appear to be unfair because Superior Court might just throw it back at us. So long as we're going to have the hearing after that inspection, then I think jurisdictionally I'm okay.
I think that the assessors, we could have probably looked at this from the perspective of, hey, we left something in the summer, we've asked you now, you're asking us for the review, you need to get us in there. And we probably could have, the board could have used that as a rationale to deny the abatement. We didn't do it that way. We thought we had enough evidence on file to support the assessor's decision regardless of that. So I guess you could say that on our level we waived that. Now, I've told the applicant I can't tell him what the result of this inspection will yield until we see it.
And I mean, it's possible that inspection might yield a lower assessment.
It's possible, and it's possible that it can
Be
could
higher,
be
right.
higher,
Right.
But there's a willingness there. I think when you read the email chain from the applicant's eager to have a discussion with myself about his value at least going forward. And so we'll see where this all goes.
So can I ask you, the select board denied the appeal, but I don't see their decision in here. Unless I missed it.
Yep, this would be the letter that was issued to the applicant from the select board. I think it's probably the last one. And then prior to that,
Okay, but it's from you, right? Is that the one, March 15th?
Yep.
Oh, but it says, just your hand, it says assessors vote of decision. So assessors, is that the select board? They're one of the same as what you're, okay, maybe that's my confusion.
What they typically do at that level is they don't hold a hearing. They don't take testimony. They review these at their selectmen's meeting.
Right.
And they ask me for a guidance memo outlining the material that we've received, and they generally make a decision based upon that guidance memo.
Okay, all right, I'm with you.
So I don't have any problem. I don't have any issues with holding a hearing. There is the off chance that if this were to go to Superior Court, a Superior Court judge could say, never should have even held this hearing. You know, but I don't believe that's a danger for the board. If anything, it would be that it would never would have gone that far.
To me, if we're gonna err, I'd rather err on the side of giving the taxpayer all the opportunities to appeal.
So I think what I would be looking for from the board is a vote to accept the application for appeal.
Okay.
And then we can move and start looking at dates to set up for a hearing.
Okay.
Also move.
Do I have a second?
Second?
Okay. I want to put it to vote. Okay. And at this time, I guess we would consider some dates.
So, the applicant filed this letter of intent on May 9th, and obviously if you apply a 60-day notice of decision to that, you're coming up to a early July deemed denied date, and we anticipated that this wouldn't happen that fast. It's pretty common. Board of Assessment Review decisions would require an extension. We've mailed the applicant a request for extension on behalf, Kayla mailed it on behalf of the board in advance by certified mail. The applicant has indicated he's received it and he's going to respond. We haven't actually received it yet, but the request for extension extends the deadline to September 30th, just to make sure that there was ample time to render a decision on this case if, you know, it needed to be tabled or, you know, who knows what could happen. So I anticipate the applicant, he's indicated to me he's going to approve that. So I think we're looking at a deadline for a decision of the end of September. I was also looking at my own schedule, and I don't have a lot of time here in July. I wanted to see if a couple of dates might work for the board, perhaps an August 23rd or August 30th date, which would both be Thursdays. Trying to keep them away from Mondays and Tuesdays, right, Kayla? Because we have select board, planning board type meetings that may happen on they have more regularly scheduled meetings on those nights. We don't want a potential conflict there. Thursdays looks like a pretty open day as far as the use of this facility. I don't know how do you guys feel about those two?
I can do either one.
Yeah, so can I.
Yeah, as long as I know ahead of time, I can schedule.
Sorry about that. The only thing I think I didn't put in here that we should address is whether or not there are any conflicts of interest, particularly amongst the three of you. Are any of you familiar with the applicant at all?
I am not.
Or Kings Grant, have any real estate dealings in the Kings Grant area?
I don't think there's a conflict. I mean, Kings Grant's on Panther, and I live on Panther,
Yeah.
so.
But you don't live in Kings Grant?
No, I do not.
No. Yeah, if there was a potential reason someone have to recuse themselves, we would probably know it now. So the applicant doesn't show up and say, hey, you shouldn't be
He
here in
doesn't
this
like
case. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, okay.
Just on the date, my preference would be to do the 30th.
Okay.
This is the 23rd, although I could do the 23rd
August
if
30th.
it makes a difference.
What you would probably see from me, if it were an August 30th, would be around the 14th or 15th, I'll be here in Raymond. That's when I would be providing my submission to the board, which would be a couple weeks prior to the hearing.
Okay.
And it'll give me an opportunity to get all the town's materials together. And then typically what we would do here is, you know, it may be just a PowerPoint, you know, just a list going over the highlights, but you get the bulk of the submission sometime that week from us. How about time? Do you like their daytime meetings, or would you prefer a night meeting?
Myself, I prefer in the evening, but
Evening's fine.
Yeah, I'm indifferent.
What time would you? I think, you know, if you think that you may conduct the hearing, the deliberation, and the decision all at once, you may want to get an early start. You probably, the hearing can go an hour to an hour. People will say, you know, we'll all say we need a half an hour or 20 minutes,
Right.
but, you know,
it can go much longer.
yeah, and then you've got the deliberation process, so I don't know if you wanted to go, what's the earliest that you think you would be able to?
I mean, I could probably do like a 4 or 5 o'clock.
4, do you want to try for 4, or would
Let's
you
try
rather
for
do
4. Yeah, let's try for 4.
4 p.m.?
I can just schedule to get out early
All right.
for that particular.
We would, Kayla will send a notice to the applicant, and I'll be speaking with the applicant anyway, so that they have notice of when the hearing is. And Kayla will take care of
I'll notify Chris.
the legal requirements, because it is a public hearing. So theoretically, people could show up and offer up.
I'm sure we'll be swamped.
Yeah, it's high drama. Yeah. And if anything, you know, I would keep you advised if anything changes on that front. I'm not sure where the applicant's gonna go, so. I think that's all I have.
If I do find a conflict with that meeting time, I will let you know.
Okay, sounds good.
I guess I will let you know, I do have, I had 2 appeals came into the Board of Selectmen late, and they've answered those at their June meeting. I don't know whether or not, I suppose there could be there's a possibility there could be more than one hearing. It's totally unrelated, but I guess I'll just mention it because this was a fairly large high-value property represented by law firm, and so they have a 60-day window here. So if the need came, and we may end up having to call a meeting in July or early August for the if we were to receive another appeal, but chances are you could probably double up that one with your hearing, but I don't know that there'll be one.
Okay.
I'm just giving you
Heads up.
a pre-warning. Yeah.
And at this time, is there any other business anyone has concerns? Okay,
Move to adjourn?
move to adjourn.
Second?
We'll adjourn.
So it is.
Thank you.
Thanks, Alan.